This homeless person had no way of getting in touch with anyone from his old life, including his family and friends. But you're about to hear how lucky he was that a police officer helped him get a second chance. After a while, the homeless person was heard saying, "Who would have thought something like this could happen to anyone, let alone me?" Before we start, can we get this video to 1,000 likes? Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. The guy who was living on the street was born in 1950. His mother decided to give him up for adoption when he was 2 years old, and he ended up living with a couple in San Leandro, California. After a while, the couple who had taken him in was no longer around. His immediate and extended family members, who didn't like him, didn't waste any time cutting off all ties with him and turning their backs on him. He had also lost touch with his childhood friends who still lived in San Leandro, so he was left to take care of himself. He got a job as a truck driver and was mostly happy with it, but he ran into a problem that wouldn't have stopped a truck. He felt very bad about this. This kind of problem could have ended his life, and it did. He was now homeless and living by himself. The traffic jam on the road was caused by accident. Because of the accident, he could no longer drive a car. He had to use a wheelchair for more than a year before he was able to switch to crutches. He went to other places to find a job, but he couldn't because of his disabilities. Meet Mike Myers. Myers couldn't pay for himself and didn't have any family or friends he could ask for help, so when he lost his job, he had no choice but to live on the street. Myers turned 67 in 2017, and up until that point, he had spent his whole adult life living on the streets. He was used to living that way, so he forgot everything about his old life and lost hope. The sad fact is that he is just one of the thousands of people who live their lives in the same way. In 2017, the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development said there would be 554,000 homeless people in the United States. 25% of all homeless people in the United States live in the state of California. After talking to one person, he started to question his thoughts. Myers didn't have a place to live, so he had to beg and play his guitar on the side of the road to make money. Myers was put in a situation where he had no choice but to do what Alameda County Deputy Sheriff Jacob Swalwell told him to do. He had to come up with a way to make money. Swalwell didn't know at the time that he would change how this man's life would go. He only knew that he was homeless, played guitar, and asked for money on Foothill Boulevard. He asked Myers some questions, and soon the two of them were deep in a conversation about his life. Myers could not get an identification card since he did not have any paperwork to his name. Since you need a valid ID to get government assistance, he could not obtain any. This made Swalwell feel a great deal of sadness, and as a result, he promised Myers that he would do all in his power to help Myers get off the street. Myers' mood improved as a result, and he couldn't express how appreciative he was that someone was there to assist him. At this time, Swalwell's pastor and a few other individuals from the Alameda County Sheriff's Department who were assisting him arrived to provide a hand. They collaborated in order to track down Myers' birth certificate and provide evidence that his claimed place of residence was accurate. Myers and the Department of Motor Vehicles had just met for the first time a month earlier, but he was eventually able to get his driver's license after providing them with all of the necessary documentation. During his inquiry, Swalwell uncovered information that would forever alter the course of his new friend's life. This revelation could not be reversed. When Swalwell learned that the name Myers had been altered, he was taken aback by the news. At the time of his birth, he was given the name Gordon Michael Oakley. He did not really go by the moniker McMyers. Even Myers was taken aback by this information, given that he was completely unaware of it. When a local news station learned about the event, it told the tale of the peculiar connection to entice a greater number of people to back the cause. Because of the success of this scheme, a private investigator by the name of Mark Askins decided to donate his services. He contacted Swalwell and Myers and inquired about the possibility of the two of them assisting him in locating his biological family. In point of fact, this bestowed upon Myers a revitalized feeling of optimism. Askins returned to work almost as soon as he finished his conversation with Swalwell and Myers. Because he could only go off of what was written on the birth certificate, his task ended up being more difficult than it should have been. He had to make his way to the courts to get further details. Askins was able to locate an old case file for a lady whose name was Murray Pauline Oakley after doing a substantial amount of investigation. She wed Wiley Albert Oakley in Reno, and the couple quickly welcomed a son into the world. Gordon Michael Oakley, or Mick Myers, was the name they gave him, although he was most often referred to as Mick Myers. In the years to come, Mick Myers would become a well-known musician. Sadly, after a few short years of being married, the couple made the decision to end their marriage and their relationship. Although Askins learned that the father had passed away, he did not let this deter him from looking for the baby's original mother and attempting to learn the reason she had placed her child for adoption. Finding Marie was a challenge in and of itself. To begin, her name was quite common, and considering her age, it's probable that she had already passed away before we found her. Askins didn't let this deter him, and he swiftly made contact with a lady in California who had his name and resided in that state. The two of them had the same last name. Even though he realized it was a long shot, he had to give it a chance nevertheless. When Askins called the number, he was taken aback to learn that former Marine Pauline Oakley, who was then 85 years old and lived only a few miles away, now went by her middle name, Pauline, and that she had served in World War II. After the first encounter, the two individuals met together, and Askins engaged in a lengthy conversation about her kid. She was taken aback and interested in how he was doing. It was discovered that he had an issue with his stomach not long after he was born. Case in point, because Pauline was a single mother and unable to afford the treatments for such a life-threatening illness, she made the difficult decision to give up her son to another family in the hopes that he would have a better chance of surviving if they adopted him. A newborn boy called Myers was adopted by a family that could better provide for his needs after being given away at the Catholic parish. For the first time in more than 60 years, Myers and his mother were able to communicate with one another thanks to Askins, who arranged a phone conversation between them. On the other hand, Askins would take it to an even greater extent. A few weeks later, when it was finally time for Myers to fly to his mother's home for the first time, Askins and Swalwell accompanied him on the trip. When they arrived at the residence, Myers' mother greeted them at the front door and invited them to come on inside. They clung to one another in a tight embrace for a considerable amount of time until they both burst into tears. Over 60 years had passed, and not one of them had the slightest inkling that this day would ever arrive. In spite of the fact that a significant amount of time had elapsed, they remained adamant about getting back together. His mother shared a great deal of her life's history with him as she flipped through an old photo album that was full of images of him and his siblings. The two of them ultimately led lives that were not all that unlike one another in the end. When his mother found out about all of her son's issues, it caused her a great deal of emotional distress. Myers had long since abandoned the hope that he would ever be reunited with his family in any form. After spending the previous 30 years of his life on the streets by himself, he realized that it had all been a dream. Then suddenly he found himself in the heart of a large family, surrounded by his mother, as well as his siblings, sisters, and even his grandnieces and nephews, all of whom were excited to see him. Without the help of Deputy Swalwell and the rest of his team, Myers and his mother would not have been able to locate one another and reunite. Their efforts were much appreciated. Myers and his family will be thankful to you for the rest of their lives.